first went to see him in the White House, all the things that he could have said to me, had been in office about 3 weeks. He said to me, "This is the most luxurious place I've ever lived in my life. Do you know, Chris, that I have people who press my suit every morning and shine my shoes every morning and help me put my tie on? It's the most luxurious place I've ever lived in my life. And I've lived in some luxurious places." I mean, this is what he thinks of the presidency. Who's pressing his suit and who's shining his shoes? The presidency is about serving the people who elect you. And anything that they do at the White House to make your life easier, it's not because somehow you're great. You have to earn that greatness. It's because they want to make your life easier so you can serve the people longer and harder and better. And he'll never do that. And New Hampshire is the only place that's going to stop him. Iowa's not going to stop him. And if Iowa gives him a big win on January 15th, why in the hell would New Hampshire do the same thing? New Hampshire's never done the same thing as Iowa. New Hampshire looks out at Iowa and says, "Not us. You've always done the opposite." And it's time for us as a country to stand up, but by serving a greater and bigger cause. And I'm running for president because I want to do the big and consequential things. Things that need to be done that other people are too afraid to confront. The people who are unwilling to speak the truth to power when they're running for president, beware. They'll be unwilling to speak truth to the power that is Putin, the power that is Xi in China, the power that is Kim Jong-un in North Korea, or the Ayatollah in Iran. If you're unwilling to say Donald Trump is unfit for office, then you have no business running for president of the United States. So, you get to make that decision up here. And I'm going to make sure that everybody understands before January 23rd that that is the choice. And that a bunch of nice words in a word salad that uses words like compassion when you refuse to answer a question on abortion, that says that Donald Trump was the right president at the right time, and that for some reason drama and chaos follow him wherever he goes. Well, folks, that's like the arsonist saying, for some reason, burning buildings follow me wherever I go. We know why. He creates the chaos, he creates the drama, because he wants to distract you from everything he's not doing for you and everything he is doing for himself. So, we're going to make that case over the next 6 weeks. And I need your help to make that case. I can't do it by myself. Mary Pat can't do it by herself. We need all of you to be talking to people and saying to them, is this what we really want for our country? Do we want the symbol of America to be a 78-year-old man who cares only about himself and not about the people who gave the honor once already of being president? I think the answer to that is no. And I think you're going to help me give that answer loudly and clearly here on January 23rd. So I thank you for coming. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to take your questions on whatever you have on your mind this morning. So, who wants to ask anything?
Okay, you're now President of the United States.
Well, that's a relief. I feel so much better now.
Okay, you go walk into your office. It's day one. What's your first decision?
First decision is to send the National Guard to the border to help the really overwhelmed Customs and Border Patrol officers who are dealing with 200,000 attempted illegal crossings a month. And we have to get control over our southern border because it's not only an economic issue, it's a national security issue. And the first job of the President of the United States is to protect the safety and the security of the American people. That's job one. And that's why that's the first thing I would do when I walked into the Oval Office. Really, probably not the first thing. The first thing I'd do is sit in the chair and go. It was a long journey to this chair. But then, hopefully, the good staff that I would hire would have that executive order sitting on my desk with a pen next to it ready for me to sign it. And then I would go and speak directly to the men and women in the National Guard that I'd be sending to the border and tell them why it's so important for them to go and to leave their families for a little while and to help secure that border to keep America safe. So that'd be the first thing. Other questions? Yes, sir?
And we're 34 trillion in debt. I mean, our deficit spending is $2 trillion a year. Would you veto those?
Yeah, look, the first thing I would do is demand, either through negotiation or by veto, that we go back to pre-COVID spending levels. If we went back to pre-COVID spending levels, the deficit this year is $1.8 trillion. That would take $1 trillion off the debt deficit. We'd go from $1.8 trillion to $800 billion. Now, that is still a significant mountain to climb, but we cut it by more than half right in the beginning. And there's no, in order to keep the economy upright, to keep people in their homes, to keep people feeding their families and doing all they need to do. But we don't need to do that anymore. This is the Democrats' dream, to keep spending all that money. We need to stop it. The next thing I would do in the first budget cycle is go to something that I did in New Jersey when I had an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion. Don't assume any spending for the next year, and you make them justify each and every program in their department. And what resulted in New Jersey was that I eliminated 832 programs in the first year. If I do something of a similar scale on the federal level, my popularity in New Jersey went from 55% to 38% when I did that, because every one of those programs has a constituency. But the bigger constituency is the American people who don't want to pay higher taxes and who don't want to continue to pile this debt on. Remember, 14 trillion of the 33 trillion in debt has been added in the last 7 years. Why would that be? You know, because you have two guys in Joe Biden and Donald Trump who know they're not going to be around to pay it. And so they don't want to be politically unpopular, and they just keep saying yes to everything. And we can't have that. So I tell you, I'm going to do it, just like I did it in New Jersey. And what we did in our state after I made those initial cuts was for the next 7 years, spending never went above 2% increase. It averaged 1.8% a year. And of that 1.8%, 90% of it was to pay pension, health care for our employees, and debt service. So discretionary spending went up every year on average less than 0.2%. That's fiscal discipline. And I keep saying no and using the line item veto, which I wouldn't have as president, so we'd have to veto broadly. But in the end, when they know you're serious, they get along too. Remember, every one of those budgets, I got a Democratic legislature to pass every one of those budgets. Democratic majorities. They could have stopped every one of those budgets, and they did not. And the reason they didn't was because they knew it was right too. They just didn't want a horrible person for doing all these things. Every year, he is an awful, horrible person. We'll vote yes, but he's an awful, horrible person. And I used to say to them all the time, say whatever you want about me on the floor. The first thing we did when we got in response to your question, when I was governor, the first thing I did was we had a $2 billion deficit that we had to fix in 5 months for the end of the fiscal year. Dollars in spending that had already been appropriated. And we have something in New Jersey called the Disaster Control Act. I declared the budget a disaster. And that's exactly what I did. $2 in spending. The day after I did it, that night, the Senate president, who's a Democrat, said he's horrible, he's a dictator, we're not going to take this, we're going to stand up against him. Well, we parked right next to each other at the State House. So the next morning, we got there at the same time. We were walking into the State House, and I put my arm around him, and I said, Steve, look, I read what you said last night in the paper, and I'm really concerned. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to rescind my order. And then you guys can figure out how you're going to cut $2 billion in spending to balance the budget. And this is politics. Everybody looked at me and goes, oh, Governor, don't overreact. We were just having a little fun. You do what you do. You keep doing that. It's okay. That's what leadership is. And on spending, that's what we have to do. Because what it will do, too, is bring interest rates down, bring inflation down, so that people can afford, a lot of families, the ability to buy a home where they don't have that right now because of how high interest rates are.
How would you sort of weigh in on the leadership issues at Harvard and some of these issues regarding DEI?
Well, I weighed in on it already in the third debate. I was the first person to say that the presidents of Harvard, Penn, and Cornell should all be fired. And I said that almost 2 months ago. Look, the people who work on those campuses are the responsibilities of the president and the board of trustees of those campuses. An ocean of people that they've hired who believe that diversity is more important than quality, that propaganda is more important than truth. And we send our children at a very big expense to these places to be taught not to be indoctrinated. So what I would do is if they have examples of discrimination and harassment on their campus, which you see now, I would revoke their federal funding and say you cannot do this because you're violating civil rights laws, and use the civil rights laws against these people who are violating the civil rights of every Jewish student today on those campuses, and harass Jewish students because of their religion. It is wrong, and it is unacceptable. And the president has to pull federal funding, but also use the bully pulpit to let people know that they think it's wrong. So you need to do both. It's not good enough just to do one. I think you have to do both. And I think that's where President Biden has failed, not only because he's not even talking about pulling federal funding from these places, but we don't see protests against Muslims on campus right now. We don't see it. And if we did, I would be against that too. But what we see is a growing, ugly anti-Semitism. And I want to remind you what happens if we don't get this under control. In 1940, the students of Georgetown University voted Adolf Hitler the most admired world leader. This is not new, everybody. History is repeating itself. We better make sure it doesn't repeat itself in other ways as well. And so that's what the president, I think, needs to do on those issues. Hey, Rita.
Speaking of dynamics going on of the supply chain and costs going up, and people pushing for $15, $20 an hour minimum wages, where, you know, a small business, somewhere along that, I'd like to make a profit too,
Yeah.
you know, for all my hard work, you know. So when they talk about small business, and we saw this during COVID, you know, 500 employees in my mind is not a small business, you know, so what can we do to kind of change the dynamic and help true small business, you know, with 10, 20 employees who you know, everybody talks about how much they support small business and the Main Street businesses and all this kind of stuff, but small businesses like these and ours, you know, we're constantly struggling with all these different dynamics, you know, hitting us from every direction, and a lot of them went out during COVID.
Sure.
It just couldn't continue. And those that took advantage of the EIDL loan from the government, and you know, and people are like, well, you got government money. I said, yeah, I have a 30-year mortgage now, not only on my house, but now on my business. So what can we do about any of those types of things that are going on?
Well, it really comes down to the government wanting to regulate everything. And so I confronted this problem in New Jersey because we are a very aggressive regulatory state. And when I took over, what I did on my first day there was suspend all of the pending regulations, and then I put my lieutenant governor in charge of going and finding out which regulations we should revoke, specific difficulties you just talked about by getting rid of this regulation. And so she spent the first 6 months doing that, and then brought over 400 regulations to me that she said were hurting small business, costing them money, and other businesses as well, not just small business. And we revoked them. And that's what you can do as president too, because those regulations are executive actions. They're not legislative action, because, look, I vetoed minimum wage increases that I thought were outrageous, and you know what my legislature did? I vetoed it, and I kept sustaining those vetoes. They passed a constitutional amendment to put a $15 minimum wage in our Constitution. And the reason they did that was because it's the only area of state government in New Jersey where the governor has no say. So they can pass a constitutional amendment in the legislature, put it directly on the ballot without my signature, and then if the voters vote for it, it passes. That's the only way they were able to get that higher minimum wage past me in New Jersey, was to put it in the Constitution. So now our Constitution has, along with freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, a $15 minimum wage. So the president has to do, they're not going to amend our federal Constitution in that way. Much too difficult, much more difficult than amending our Constitution in New Jersey. So we have to go after the regulations. That is the best thing a president can do right off the bat to help businesses like yours and ones that are larger also. Because all of them get subjected to these DEI regulations, get subjected to regulations regarding wage and benefits and all the rest that all add to the cost of you doing business. And all it does for us is raise our prices. You know, small business will raise their prices in order, as you said, to try to make a profit until they reach the point where there's a resistance point. And that's when businesses go out and close, because they can't raise their prices anymore or people won't buy their product. And if they don't raise prices, then they won't be able to survive. That's the position that this government's put businesses in. And we have to revoke these regulations and make it easier for business to do it. I've never seen a small business person who didn't want to pay their employees fairly and want to make sure that their employees got taken care of. It demeans the character of the American people to say they need the government to tell them to do that. The goodness of the American people is what does that. Just don't push them up against the wall and put them out of business. And we'd stop that. Yes, sir.
I have a question on tariffs. I'm not a big tariff guy myself. I'm free trade. And last week in the debate, Nikki Haley brought up that Trump was good on trade. And you answered that by saying he's proposing to put a 10% universal tariff on the whole world, all aspects. And Larry Kudlow, who I'm sure you know,
Sure do.
wrote an article a month before Trump hired him, telling about all the bad repercussions from tariffs.
Right.
It starts off by saying, the title is Tariffs Are Taxes. And I'd like to get your opinion on that.
They are. I mean, Larry was right until he went to go work for Trump, and then all of a sudden he was all on board with it. Look, the way Trump sold the tariffs to us was to say that if we put these tariffs on, it would change China's behavior. It hasn't changed China's behavior one bit. All it's done is raise the price of everything that we pay for. And when Nikki Haley says she wants to end normal trade relations with China, it shows she doesn't even understand what she's talking about. We already have tariffs. Normal trade relations, by the way, so everybody understands that, is trade without tariff. 95% of the products we get from China now have a tariff on it that Trump put on there. So we have, for all practical purposes, ended normal trade relations with China. So what does she mean by that? I assume what she means is that she's going to end all trade with China. Well, imagine that. We import $600 billion a year in products from China, and they import $350 billion a year in products from us. So that's $1 trillion in economic activity that she says she's going to stop. She can't really mean it. And if she, tariff, would do nothing other than raise your costs by 10%. And will do nothing to change behavior.
It would make a difference of $300 billion a year in additional taxes in the form of inflation.
Yeah, and so, you know, like we don't have enough of that already with $4.50 gallon of milk. You know, and a $4.50 gallon of gas. I mean, it's ridiculous. And these folks think you're stupid. If I use this phrase all the time, it's TV tough guy talk. And it applies to Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley just as much as it applies to Donald Trump. They talk tough. And look, I don't agree with much of what Ron DeSantis has to say, but he's right about Nikki Haley in China. You know, when she was governor of South Carolina, she was giving away land to the Chinese to come over and establish businesses there. But on the other, now, all of a sudden, she says she's going to be the toughest on China. And she's going to end all trade relations with China. I mean, you know, look, this is a pattern with her, everybody. On abortion, she says she'll sign a 6-week ban on abortion. Then she says the people should decide on abortion. I mean, over and over again, depending on what audience she's in front of, she wants to please. So if she were here this morning, and you asked that question about tariffs, even after what she said in the debate, my guess is what she would have said was about tariffs and what's happening to you, and really care. And I care. She wouldn't have answered your question. But she would have given you the feeling that she cares. She really cares. Well, you know what? I wish she'd care more about the truth. She won't tell the truth about Donald Trump. She won't tell the truth about trade with China. She won't tell the truth about abortion. She won't answer the questions. And so, New Hampshire, it seems to me, is the place in this country that demands answers to their questions. That's why we had a couple hundred people show up at our town hall last night in Londonderry, because they wanted answers to questions. And with me, that's what you're going to get. You're not always going to love the answers, but you're going to get them. You and I have to agree on this. But the fact is that I agree with it because it's proven to be a wrong-headed policy. It hasn't done what he told us it would do.
It's never worked.
No.
In the 30s it didn't work.
It didn't work then, it doesn't work now. It just makes you feel good. It's a sugar high. I'm going to punish them, and then what we need to do is to say to the Chinese, look, we will continue to expand trade with you, but only if you play by the rules. And stop stealing our intellectual property. Stop breaking the rules by flooding our country with cheap products. They need it. Let me tell you something. You saw this. Okay? He came here because he needs American business to continue to invest in China because his economy is failing. Well, this is the moment where we've got him where we want him. So now let's negotiate deals that matter. Trump said he had a great trade deal with China. Do you know that for the farmers in Iowa who are now amazingly going to vote to make him the nominee again, they bought a third of what they promised to buy in Trump's trade deal. A third. It's ridiculous. And yet he thinks that putting another tariff on is going to help, where Nikki Haley thinks the same thing.
We had to give the farmers $24 billion in subsidies
Because
to combat the retaliatory tariffs
that's
the
right.
Chinese put on.
And because the Chinese weren't keeping up to their end of the bargain, so the revenue wasn't coming in.
So what's your policy for stopping China? I mean, I've been engaged with China in the military since 2000. What's the teeth that you're putting behind this?
Well, first off, the teeth has to be threefold. First is military. We have allowed, because of the war on terror, which was something we had to deal with, but it's caused us to spend less and less on our conventional deterrent. And so we now have a United States Navy that is 200 ships lower than what it used to be, and nearly 100 subs lower than it used to be. Those are the things that will deter China in the South China Sea on both trade and on military issues. So I would...
But you can't fix that in 4 years.
No, you can't fix it in 4 years. No, you can't. But what you can do is, when they see you doing it, it already changes behavior. Behavior is like a futures market, and because their military is not ready to have a war with us. It simply is not. And every military expert in this, because believe me, if they were, they would have taken Taiwan yesterday. You wouldn't take Taiwan when Joe Biden's in the White House? If you were ready, you'd do it. They're not ready. They're not ready. The real estate market in China, there are entire cities that are empty. He's got big problems coming. And this is the moment for us to go to them economically and say, you want to continue to trade in an expanded way with us? Then you have to now comply with these rules. And when you don't, we will shut down those new areas of trade. If you continue to steal intellectual property, we're not going to comply with your rules anymore, as you know. And when our companies want to go over there, they have to turn over their secrets to the Chinese. And then, lo and behold, 6 months later, a Chinese company pops up doing the very same thing that this American company had innovated. Those are the things you have to stop. It's not about tariffs. Tariffs will never do that. Because why do they care? They just increase their price. And then we pay for it, or anybody else in the world pays.
Perhaps we should demand that they should provide us their intellectual property.
You know, look, if I thought that they actually would honestly do that, you know, you could think about it. But by the way, there are a lot of their intellectual property we don't want. Ours, we have always been the better innovator. Always been the better innovator, still are. And look at what's happening with artificial intelligence right now. On AI, we're well ahead of them, and they know it. They know it, and they're trying to catch up. And the way they try to catch up is cheating. Right? So this is a key moment. because this is the next frontier of innovation. We're ahead right now, but we have to protect our secrets and stay ahead. So that's the way I would go about trying to deal with China. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so watching CNN last night with their commentators, and heard the latest about staff who shall not be named.
Yes,
And
Baltimore.
yeah, and then with them asking, these lawyers asking, from the Supreme Court, whether or not, basically, in your mind, good clock, right? How do you envision this potentially playing out? Do you think it's going to get extended long enough that he could eventually, heaven forbid,
Yeah, I don't.
get a lot of votes?
Yeah, I don't think it will get extended too long. Look, I think the Supreme Court acted really quickly in saying that they were going to look at it, and they have a history in these very politically fraught cases. And there's only two that can really compare to it in the modern time. Those are the tapes with Richard Nixon.
Right, which they said took 2 months to
Right.
get an answer back.
Yep. But you know what? Not really 2 months, because look, it took less than a month because the decision on the Bush case came December 12th. Election day was November 3rd. And they decided on December 12th that Bush won the election. And on the Nixon tape case, it did take about 2 months. But if we were to get that decision in 2 months, if the Supreme Court were to take it by the end of the month, and they were to come back to us by early February, there'd be no reason to delay the case, because the fact is that all they're deciding is the core issue of, can a president be prosecuted? Now, I don't think this should take very long to decide. It seems to be pretty settled law. When a president is in office, he can't be prosecuted. The only thing you can do with a president is to impeach and remove. But once they leave office, they're just like you and me. And if they have conduct which is within the statute of limitations, which this conduct would be from when he was president, he's got to be subject to prosecution. If he's not, then George Washington was wrong when he said, we don't want a king, we want a president. Because we'll have a king then. If a president can do whatever he wants while he's in office and not be subject to prosecution once he leaves. So I think the Supreme Court will make this decision. I think they'll make it pretty quickly. Now, it may put off the March trial date a month or two.
But, yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question.
It's a
Because
concern
now they're
for
gonna
me,
say,
I
now
can
we
guarantee
need-
you that. I'm concerned about it. I'll be honest with you. I mean, we need this case to go to trial so the American people can see very clearly the evidence against him, presented by people who are not left-wing commentators or left-wing prosecutors, as he calls them. The first witness against him will be Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff, and one of the founders of the Freedom Caucus, who has an immunity deal. You don't take immunity unless you've find that he committed crimes at Donald Trump's direction and that he watched Donald Trump commit crimes. I don't know how he gets out from under that. And for a lot of even Trump supporters, to hear somebody like Mark Meadows say that Donald Trump is a criminal is much different than hearing someone on CNN say it. And so I think it's a key part of this race and a key part of our determination. And folks in New Hampshire are not going to have the benefit of knowing that verdict. But what they should know is that we run the risk of nominating someone who come November of 24 would not be able to vote for himself. Because if he's convicted of a felony, he loses his right to vote. Think about that. You want to nominate someone who won't be able to vote for himself? It's outrageous. He's disqualified. He's unfit. Yet, yesterday, Nikki Haley said he's fit to be president. He's under 4 different criminal indictments, Nikki. How is he fit to be president? It's outrageous. And it should, in my mind, be disqualifying for her. Anybody who sits there and says that he's fit as a 4-time indicted person, I just don't understand it. We should have higher standards for the presidency. And higher standards for anybody who wants to seek the presidency. And that's why I'm going to continue to beat that drum. Because if we don't win that argument, we're not winning the argument. Because that's the argument. Other questions for anybody? Yes, sir.
I'm in manufacturing, I'm an engineer, and over the last 40 years, I've watched our manufacturing base erode almost to nothing. And I've heard a lot of candidates say that they're going to bring it back. Now, it's taken 40 years for this to occur. It'll take 40 years for it to come back. How do you plan to start that regeneration process?
Well, first off, to understand how to fix it, you have to understand why it happened. And it happened purely because of the motive of profit. They could go to other countries, pay less to manufacture the same products, and so businesses made the decision to go overseas to do what they're doing from a manufacturing perspective. I think the way I would start the ball rolling in the other direction is to just do it narrowly at first. Let's just bring back things that are in our health security and national security interest on manufacturing. And the fact is, we saw during COVID that by letting the health security issues go away, and by that I mean pharmaceuticals, personal protective equipment, the other things we need to protect and guard our health, we realized that most of that stuff now is made in China. And what happened during COVID, they said, yeah, we'll keep it. We'll give you a little bit, and when we give it to you, we will charge you through the nose. Remember when people were paying for masks and for gowns and for gloves? We can't allow ourselves to be exposed that way again. So I think the way to start it is to take things that are military-based and things that are health-based and start to bring that manufacturing back here. Show that we can do it in a way where it can be profitable as well as smart for our own security. And then you get that ball rolling in the other direction. But I think you're right. Candidates overpromise on this. You know, unless they're going to say we're going to give government subsidies to make the prices more competitive, which to me just defeats the very purpose of it. We need to be able to go and get more competitive. And first we need to show we can do it in those areas that are very important to our health security and our national security. That's where I'd start. And you're right. Something that happens over 40 years isn't going to be fixed in 4 or 8. It's got to be something that becomes a national policy regardless of party. And as you start to move that back, we'll never get all the way back to where we were. The world's a different place. But we can get back on those things that are most important to our country to make sure that we're protected for both the national security and the health security basis. What questions for anybody? Yes, Mark.
Very dear friend, Social Security.
Yeah.
A lot of people are under the impression that you just don't have enough people paying into the system. But as you so accurately pointed out, we get a really nice nest egg in there inside, and our friends in the federal government have it. It's a good place to take money from for their favorite programs. But if you go to your zero-based idea as a president, maybe we could look at some of those programs and see if we can find bring it down a little bit, because you have to pay back what was there that we had no authority on.
Well, the problem with that, Laura, is this, that there's so much money that's needed for Social Security, and I don't mind doing that, but I don't want to lie to you and say that would be a solution, because it wouldn't. The fact is that we've so outspent, there is no trust fund anymore. The trust fund is filled with treasury bonds, borrowed money. And so what we need to do, remember that Social Security in 10 years now is going to be broke. And if it is, in the law, as it's written now, there's an automatic 24% cut in everybody's benefits. Think about that for people who have to live on Social Security from day to day. A 24% cut would have them picking between heating their home and feeding their families, buying their prescription drugs. We can't have that. And the most despicable part of Joe Biden's State of the Union last year was when he stood up and he said, let's all agree we're not going to touch Social Security. And both sides of the aisle stood up and cheered. I turned to Mary Pat, we were watching it, and I said, a room full of liars and hypocrites. I mean, it needs to be fixed. And the fix is not going to be pleasant, because we went on a bender and spent all the money. And the hangover always stinks afterwards. But we need to go and work our way through the hangover. How are we going to do it? We have to raise the retirement age for people that are in their 30s and 40s. And we need to do that for 2 reasons. One, because we need to make the system more solvent. But also, 2, because everyone's living longer. The deal on Social Security was great. You know, FDR was a genius. He establishes Social Security. He makes the retirement age at that time 62. when the average life expectancy in the 1930s was 63. So you all pay in, and maybe you'll collect for a year on average. The government is going to make a killing, and they did. And that's that trust fund you were talking about. Over decades, they made a killing. But now, the average life expectancy for men is 81. The average life expectancy for women is 83. And so, now you have people who are going to be on Social Security, on average, for nearly 20 years. We have to make adjustments to that. So for our son, who's 30 years old, he's going to have to put up with 3 or 4 more years of working. But if he can't adjust to that in the next 40 years, we got bigger problems with our son than Social Security. We also should have means testing for Social Security. It should be like other social welfare programs. Because in the end, that's what it is. It was established to be a safety net. Because when the Great Depression came and there was no Social Security, and everyone relied upon government or company-funded pensions, and those companies went bankrupt, people were retiring in poverty. And this was meant to prevent that. Well, if you have someone who has saved for their retirement very nicely and can sustain themselves well without Social Security, do they really need to collect it? Now, I know the argument is I paid into the system, I want my money back. The analogy I use all the time is that Mary Pat and I have been really lucky. We've never had to use food stamps. But we pay for food stamps and our taxes, as you do, every year. I don't regret doing that at all. Because I don't want anybody in our country going to bed hungry if we can avoid it. There are plenty of programs we pay for people in need that as Americans we generously pay for because we believe it's the right thing to do. I think Social Security is the same way. I don't want anybody growing old in poverty, not being able to afford to shelter themselves, feed themselves, medicate themselves. But to do that, we need to do those two things. And if we don't do them, everyone's going to get a 24% cut. And it's 10 years away. So the next president has to deal with it. In the next 8 years, it has to be dealt with. Because if it's not, that's what the result will be. And by the way, it's 11 years on Medicare. And there'll be an exact same cut, actually 1% higher, 25% cut in Medicare. Imagine what that will do for every American 65 and over who relies upon Medicare as their primary health insurance. So these things have to be fixed. And means testing and raising the retirement age are the two best ways to do it, unless you want to broadly raise taxes. And all you do then is take money away from the people who are trying to save for retirement. It's self-defeating. I'd rather have people save for their retirement. And look, guys like Warren Buffett don't need Social Security. Time for people of means to say this is one of the things we provide for the less fortunate in our country. And that's the way I would approach it. Other questions for anybody? Well, look, I'll let everybody go and do what they want to do today. I want to tell you that this is what makes New Hampshire great. It's opportunities like this, with people being able to ask questions and hopefully get answers. And that's why I encourage you to go to Haley town halls and DeSantis town halls. I don't encourage you to go to Trump because he doesn't have a town hall. He'll come here and he'll talk at you for 2 hours and tell you how aggrieved he is and how horrible his life is and how he's going to be president again to gain retribution against all those people who have made his life so terrible. The poor billionaire from New York and Palm Beach, Florida, who's suffering as we speak under the yoke of the terrible things that have been done to him. But go to Haley and DeSantis town halls. I want you to compare. Because they won't answer questions, and I do. And if they won't answer your questions when they want your vote, will they answer your questions when they have your power? I think you know the answer to that question. And so I appreciate all of you coming this morning. I need you, if you've decided that I'm the person you want to vote for, and I want your vote, I need you to not only vote for me, I need you to go out and talk to your friends and your colleagues at work, your neighbors, the folks you see at church or synagogue, the people that you interact with every day, and tell them why this is so important, and tell them that New Hampshire can change the course of history. And when people say, no, I can't change the course of history, I remind people all the time that a small band of people who are willing to stand up for what's right is what changes history. The reason I know it's true is because the only thing that ever has. Remember, this country exists because folks like Washington and Adams and Jefferson and Hamilton and Franklin went to Philadelphia as a small band of people. Think about it. There were 40 of them in that room. 40. To stand up against the largest army in the world at that time. And they created the greatest country the world's ever seen because of their courage. I don't know if we have 40 people in this room. It's close. If they could do it, so can you. And we have more means to do it now.
We've done it in the past. We did it with Reagan. Reagan did not win Iowa.
That's right.
New Hampshire came in and
Yep.
he really did campaign in New Hampshire, and we helped elect him president.
You sure did. And you can do it again.
And he was too old, too right-wing, but he was our choice, and it became the
That's
greatest
right.
president in the world.
So,
Last night, Rita and I left your event, took 8 signs, and found a street corner that, ooh, these would fit nicely. I traveled areas, we said, let's put some Christie signs right here.
that's great.
We've got
Thank
3
you,
in front
Mark.
of our house.
Thank you. And look, we need to do this, and we need to let people know that nothing is inevitable in this world. The greatest thing about this country is we don't have to accept what is, because we have the power to change it. And that's what we're going to do. So have a great day today, everybody. We'll see you next week here in New Hampshire. I will take it. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening. You're the best. We will.
Chestnut Hanover in Manchester, right. We also have a store in Nashua, Candy, and Worcester.
Like getting out of the way of the line.
I can go on that week because and it's 2025 is what we're planning on doing. That's the 2025 is the date that we are.
What do you think of this guy? Time to go to jail.
Oh, sorry. I think I'm going to go this way.
You guys having
I'll take my 24% haircut.
That's what you should bring.
No, I'll take it if you take it. I want the budget to get cut 24%. I want every federal employee to get 24% cut. And I want Congress to get cut. Let's see how big the show the damn on that.
That's right.
Yes.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, but you can embarrass us.
But you can embarrass him and say that.
Can I get a quick picture? Oh, man, of course. I'm the president of the United States. My pleasure, sir. Thanks for coming.
That's fun to mention that. Hey, I'll take my cut if you'll say
Keep it up. Governor. Can we get a photo? Of course, man.
This is my big kid.
You gotta give somebody the camera there, Mark.
Oh my God.
Rita, where's
Jim will
yours?
take it.
I can take it. You have a...
Thanks, Matt.
Hang on, it's gonna take me a moment to get unlocked.
Yeah, there's a
Gotta
trick.
put the secret code in there. The McCabe secret code. Well, you make it too long there, Mark.
I think we're doing it.
Just put Rita.
I'm gonna
Just
teach
make it
you.
Rita. It'd be easy.
I'm gonna teach you. You did say that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Signs up.
Yeah, well, we were on the way to the event. We said, oh, we gotta get some signs.
Get up, baby. Right away.
Are you doing an interview with Adam? Oh, okay. I figured that out. Whatever, Adam. You think he's getting through? Used to be a town hall. See, something's wrong. Oh, yeah. She's the popular one.
Yeah, exactly. She was devastated. I thought she said there's lots of it was definitely not I need to find him because he has my money.
What do you think? Good. Yeah. Are you a for sure? Yeah. Oh, volunteer. Okay. So I think it's you. When did you sign up? Yeah. How do you see him? Or
Just a couple.
yeah.
Trump is in the book right away. Like, he's not good. He's not good. There's a lot of worry that the Russians see a chance.
But I'm also, I cover pretty much all of them. Yeah. But I think it is true. A lot of people.
Because the way that Trump is talking about it, he doesn't support the Christians. He's like one of the Republicans that says we need to spend it.
I think so. I think more people are like taking the choice. In my, from people that I've heard.
Are you worried about
People are kind of, testing the waters right now. Yeah.
the funding? People who want to cut the funding.
That's what it takes. That's why this is so important. It's just unfortunate for the country.
Are you from like the Bedford?
I'm actually, I was from college.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Housing market's crazy.
Yeah.
What about when you work
So we, I'm still at the residence Marriott in Manchester since like September. Yeah, beautiful and great people.
They were all West here.
Great city.
Yeah. I know. It's not that bad. Maybe in a few weeks. I'm sure I'll be
You go in January and